So this is a footnote or follow-up of sorts to my recent video focusing on all-women shortlists in the Labour Party. I want to flag a few developments relevant to that subject, one specifically relevant to the Liberal Democrat Party, and predictably one concerning one of Labour's most famous AWS alumni. Firstly, I want to highlight and correct a mistake that I actually made in my original video. Obviously, I do my utmost to fact-check the accuracy of any claims I make, and consequently, I think it's important to hold my hands up and admit it if I subsequently discover that something significant that I've said turns out not to be entirely accurate. On the one hand, it's a sort of correction that I'm actually very pleased to be able to report, because I would personally consider it to be a positive development. But then again, the informed cynic in me does feel that it is more realistically the exception that only helps to prove the very point I was making about the growing acceptance of direct sex discriminatory practices in mainstream British politics. That point being that, in my humble subjective opinion, the notion that enforced all-women shortlists for election candidates can be morally or intellectually justified on the basis of some sort of social justice argument about proportionality and reflecting the population that Parliament serves is entirely undermined by the fact that no party pushing discriminatory all-women shortlists onto their membership has to date taken up the available option to select a proportion of their election candidates exclusively from shortlists of all disabled candidates. Even more so when you consider that while the Labour Party had to actually change the law to make themselves the exception to the rule that every other employer in the country is required to abide by, and yet, given the very unique challenges and barriers faced by people with disability in this country, all disabled shortlists are something that have always been an option legally available to them. A fact that becomes particularly significant when you consider the reality that, proportionally speaking, people with disabilities remain considerably less well represented in Parliament than women. Indeed, despite representing a population approximately 2/3 smaller than the proportion of people in the UK with disabilities, there are currently more self-identifying feminists sitting in our cradle of democracy than there are disabled MPs. Since making my video, I've discovered that last year, in a mildly historical moment for politics in the UK, albeit one that largely went entirely unreported, the Liberal Democrats do appear to have employed this very option when selecting their candidate for Eastbourne in East Sussex. As this report from the Disability News Service website confirms, in September 2016, the Liberal Democrats became the first political party to pick a candidate to fight a parliamentary seat from a shortlist containing only disabled people. Stephen Lloyd was selected by his party to fight a possible snap general election from a shortlist of 2 disabled candidates. Baroness Brinton, the party's disabled president, said that she was now hoping that at least one more local party in one of the Liberal Democrats' 10% most winnable seats would agree to select a prospective parliamentary candidate from an all-disabled shortlist. Stephen Lloyd said that he had always believed that his impairments, he's hard of hearing, should not be a barrier to being an MP, but instead something that allows him to appreciate the barriers that many other disabled people still experience. Lloyd said that he was proud the Liberal Democrats have taken this unprecedented step of having a disabled-only shortlist. With around 10 million people in this country having a disability, he said he would like to see many other disabled people given the opportunity to serve our nation, because there is still some way to go to having fair representation of people with disabilities in Parliament, but at least this is a step in the right direction. So my thanks to a member of the Liberal Democrats subreddit for pointing this out, more of which in a moment. But having held my hands up to the error in my previous video, let me just sprinkle a healthy dose of cynicism on this development and share why I think it may possibly turn out to be simply the exception that only serves to prove my point. Mr. Lloyd was subsequently elected to Parliament in the snap general election that occurred the following year in 2000. 2017, but as far as I can tell, Baroness Brinton's hope that at least one more candidate would be selected from an all-disabled shortlist in one of the Liberal Democrats' 10% most winnable seats didn't actually happen. Indeed, despite the deputy leader's claim that all-disabled shortlists are very much part and parcel of their positive action programme, it doesn't appear to have even happened for any of their least winnable seats. Obviously, I did write to the Lib Dems central office inquiring about their policy and what, if any, goals they have set, and what additional positive action measures they are using, such as outreach to the disabled community and funding to support the additional costs disabled MPs can encounter. But 2 months later, I'm still waiting for a reply. Meanwhile, one notable aspect about Mr. Lloyd's background is that he had already served as an MP at the time of his party's coalition government with the Conservative Party, and was in fact seeking re-selection after having lost his seat in 2015. According to Wikipedia, his voting record was extremely loyal to that coalition government. And interestingly, again according to the Disability News Service, in 2013 he faced severe criticism and even accusations of hypocrisy after voting with the government on controversial measures in their welfare reform bill that introduced significant cuts to disabled people's benefits. Cuts which, as I pointed out in my earlier video, United Nations observers have subsequently described as leading to a human catastrophe and grave and systematic violations of disabled people's human rights. So excuse my cynicism, but it does occur to me that the one and to date only time that a party has narrowed their selection pool to a total of, count them, 2 possible candidates with a disability might very well have had as much to do with freezing out the wrong sort of local competition as it had to do with anything else at all. Of course, I could be wrong, but after my recent personal experience with the Liberal Democrats' deputy leader, my perception of that party as a genuine option for the liberally minded has taken a considerable nosedive. And to be frank, it hit rock bottom after my recent treatments on the official Liberal Democrat subreddit. Having completed my video on Labour's use of all-women shortlists, I was curious to see if the grassroots membership of the Liberal Democrats had any reservations about their party's recent decision to go down the same route. So I posted a question on the Liberal Democrat subreddit asking exactly that. From a glass half full perspective, this did turn out to be a relatively worthwhile exercise because, as I've already mentioned, one respondent did helpfully update me on their historic use of a disabled-only shortlist. But as regulars presumably won't be surprised to learn, the main other outcome arising from my inquiry was a sadly all too predictable insight into the sort of overtly intolerant and insanely hypocritical behaviours that in-group identitarianism inevitably invites. Because within 24 hours of posting my question, I was awarded a lifetime ban from the subreddit of a political party who proclaim their mission to involve safeguarding a free and open society. And just to push those hypocritical behaviours into hyperdrive, the moderator who single-handedly banned me had the gall to brand me as an alt-right racist while being entirely comfortable using the N-word in his own correspondence. Anywho, a couple of final thoughts relating to all-women shortlists, which feature someone I suggested could be considered to be the poster girl both for and against direct sex discrimination. Because Jess Phillips recently popped up on Channel 4 News' podcast, hosted by Krishnan Guru-Murphy, called Ways to Change the World, and I rather kindly watched it in its entirety so that you don't have to. Aside from revealing that the main thing she would like to do to change the world would be to disenfranchise older voters, which is nice, Phillips threw a couple of revelations into the pot, which I think helpfully helped to support observations that I made in my earlier video. The first was my observation that surely the most problematic outcome of Labour's now heavily embedded policy of sex discrimination is that some of their new generation of staunchly feminist MPs often appear to have such an inflated sense of entitlement that it does seem inevitable that their party's leadership can only ever ultimately fail to satisfy their insatiable and ever increasing demands. A point that Phillips helped to illustrate when the conversation with Channel Channel 4 came round to the subject of quotas, and she declared that she would like to see compulsory quotas attached to all public spending, which would involve 51% of all related employment opportunities ring-fenced for women, whether they be on a local Birmingham building project, or presumably for that matter, a faraway foreign battlefield.
Housing is at
top of the list.
Top of the list. But when building that house, what I would want to see is a quota that says any money that goes on any industrial strategy, any infrastructure, that 50% of those jobs have to go to 51% of the country, to the women. Because yes, house building, another reason why it's a silver bullet is because it creates jobs, but it just creates jobs for one sort of person.
You'd have
doesn't
quotas?
It? I would absolutely quota the hell
Across
out of
the board?
Every single penny of government spending. I would quota the hell out of it. We have a powerful lever in government and local government and every branch of Whitehall that we never ever pull. And we say we need more women in tech, we need more women in gas engineering, and then we go, we hope it happens. The triumph of hope over reality.
A reality that would realistically require draconian government interventions to force women to do their share of the heavy lifting on building sites, whether they choose to or not. And a reality that is supported by psychologists' research into a gendered preference theory, which may also go some way to explaining the apparent dearth of convincing female candidates for Labour's top job. Which leads me to the possibility that later in the same interview, Phillips appeared to validate my own long-held belief that Jess Phillips is more likely to end up on the leaderboard of Strictly Come Dancing than she is to ever be the one to finally break the particular glass ceiling that seems to vex her so.
You've already said you may not stay in Parliament forever, not as long as Harriet Harman. And you've also said you can't say that Jeremy Corbyn will be a good Prime Minister. So who should be the leader of the Labour Party?
Oh gosh, that's a really difficult question to answer, isn't it? It's really difficult. Obviously, I would like it to be a woman. Angela Rayner would be my choice out of those that get heralded at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. And you wouldn't stand?
I used to answer this question from a feminist perspective and say, I would say that I would want to be the leader of the Labour Party because I think it's important for women to be honest and talk about their ambitions. But, you know, I walked down here today and I walked through the streets on a sunny day in London and I love my life. It'd be an enormous sacrifice to give up my life and my freedom to be the leader of the Labour Party. I think that would be a sacrifice that somebody who gets heralded as living an ordinary life and wants to continue to be normal. Actually, I think my normality is the thing I'd find hard to sacrifice.
Anyway, hopefully these clips don't invite another game of whack-a-mole with Channel 4's draconian copyright bots. They've recently put a claim against my video about the Cathy Newman-Jordan Peterson exchange, and rather than get into a debate about its obvious fair use qualification, I'm currently working on a little project which I think is a better long-term solution. I mention that because the next thing I have scheduled for upload includes a relatively rare Channel 4 news clip featuring none other than Cathy Newman. So watch this space and we'll see how that all works out. And in the meantime...
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.